Hello, and welcome to Wild Vittles. As you see my background if you're watching on YouTube, and you may hear a bit of a difference if you're just on the audio-only podcast, I'm out in my garage. And today I am going to cook some white bass, and I'm going to fry the fish, which you might be like, Chris, that's not a very complex dish, but I thought we might talk a little bit about white bass fishing, some tips around cutting the fish to be able to make sure it cooks effectively, and what I do in my setup. I'm doing this out in the garage because I tend to make a mess, and my wife doesn't like the smell of fried fish, so I'm doing it out in the garage to keep marital peace as I'm going. So what I've got in front of me is a pretty simple setup. I've got my Coleman stove going. I've got a cast iron. I think this is a 12 or 14-inch skillet with probably 3/4 of an inch of canola oil in it. Let me look at my temp. About 150 degrees Fahrenheit right now, and I'm trying to get it up to about 350. I've got it on a low temperature because I still need to cut my fish. I've got 4 or 5. I caught 11 over the weekend. 4 or 5 fish worth of fillets of white bass from this last weekend's kayak fishing trip. I have the blue box of Louisiana fish fry, seasoned. And this is just the extreme easy version. There are other versions that I'll do where you've got like some baking powder and some cornmeal, and you do flour and you double dredge it. I don't really have time for that tonight. So this is a Monday night. Poured it into a bag. I've got my fillets. I still need to cut them up and get them prepped. And I'm going to do that while I kind of talk through it. So when I get some white bass, I'll fillet them. Essentially, I'll take an electric reciprocating knife and cut down the spine on one side, flip that fillet over, and then separate the skin from the fillet. So you've got, let me get a good one here, a whole fillet. I'll put that in front of the camera. You can see over there. And you got the rib section cut out, so it's mostly boneless. They should be all boneless. I'm going to cut those in a given, this is a fairly small white bass. I'll cut this piece into 2 sections. So kind of where you remove the ribs, there's a thin section next to the front. I'll cut that off, and then you've got this wider section that tapers down to the tail. I'll cut those. Generally, I'll leave those whole. But the point is, you don't throw a whole fillet in to fry. You want to get it into kind of uniform bits so that they cook evenly. And also, I will cut a cross section across some of these fillets to kind of down into the thicker pieces of the meat to allow the oil to get down into the meat and cook it effectively. So these have been just soaked in salt water overnight. I caught these fish yesterday, skinned them. Now I'm gonna let me see if I can get my mic down here lower. Unfortunately, my table is not sized appropriately. And then I'm going to cut these fillets into pieces. And I'm going to score. My knife is extremely sharp, and I was trying to score, and I cut right through it. So I like to have more like fish nuggets as opposed to big old honking fillets. But there really isn't a wrong way to do this. 200 degrees, we need to start moving. And if your family's looking at some of the fillets and they ask, what are those little white or black bits in those meat? Just tell them it's seasoning. But you and I both know those are parasites, and that's why we need to cook this fish thoroughly. I like this kind of pre-seasoned fish mix. You could do cornmeal. That's kind of how my granddad taught me, and my dad as well. It was just straight cornmeal and with salt and pepper. That also is very effective. I think some of the keys as well to being effective at this is also don't crowd your pan, and getting your oil up to temp and keeping it to temp. Ooh, this is a thick one. So when I cut this, I'm going to score that one. And you'll see that the pieces that you score will open up really beautifully. I like the look of them when when you they kind of curl in the opposite direction of the scoring. 200. I'm trying to make sure that my oil doesn't peak before I'm ready. I try to have these fish in good enough shape that I don't have to do any trimming, but sometimes you'll find a little piece of skin or a bone or something like that, and you've got to take care of that. But like I said, I'm cutting these into manageable size pieces. If they're thick, then I am kind of trying to pat them dry. That's what I've got paper towels out here for. You want them to be moist but not sopping wet. There we go. And a few fish, when you cut them up like this and cook them, they go a long ways. So kind of from a perspective of conservation, I try to only keep what I'm going to eat. Now there are times when you're going to have like maybe a big fish fry and you want to accumulate quite a few fish. I get that. Score those. White bass, they get a bad rap mainly because of this. They're kind of pink, and some folks say that they can have kind of an off flavor. They're not a fish that I would like try to bake, but they're really good fried. I mean, if you go over like crappie, I think are probably the most superior. Do that one as well, personally. But there are people that fish all over the United States may not have access to the same kinds of fish, or you may have more fish that are really kind of in your area. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of techniques for white bass. And you might even say, why do you even bother with white bass? They're kind of these little silly fish that people chase in the spring. I like going after native fish. I think that's really cool. Okay, I've got all of those cut up. Raise my mic now. Temp is 225, and it'll get hot at the point that I turn that fire up. I have cut the fish up now, and I've got them in a Ziploc full of the seasoning, and I'm gonna shake them in here. You could do this in a bowl, but this is kind of like it's a camping setup. So what are white bass? White bass are native fish. I think that's cool. They actually are intended, or they evolved through time in rivers and streams. So they're really a river fish that has adapted to the man-made landscape we have that has lakes. And so I fish a nearby lake, and pretty much any lake is going to have a creek running into it. And in the spring, when the water temperature gets between 55 and 60, I forget the exact temperature, maybe 58 in the spring, the white bass are compelled to go up into the streams and spawn. And as a characteristic, the fish are extremely strong. They have a voracious, I wouldn't say appetite, but they strike heavily at lures this time of year. And they stack up in big groups. And if you're lucky enough to find a spot where they are at the right time of year, you can really do well. And I fish with very light tackle. I'll take like I think it's a 4-foot crappie rod, 4 to 6 pound test line, an 1/8 inch jig. I use Roadrunners with a curly tail, but it could be with feathers. And I actually do it on my kayak, and I go up into the creeks and look for certain areas that would hold fish. They tend to be, and this is a secret, in the bends. So in the corners where there are deeper holes, tend to hold fish. And if you find a spot one year, you can tend to come back to that spot again the next year. It'll be good because of the shape of that topography. I don't use any fish finders, any electronics whatsoever. and I do extremely well. The limit in Texas is they got to be a minimum 10 inches, and pretty much all the fish I catch are like 14 inches. And I think the limit is like 25. I've never actually caught or wanted to clean 25 fish. Generally, it's in the teens is kind of where I'm like, that's more than I probably need. I'll cook what I can immediately, and then I'll put up sets of like 5 fish at a time, because that's kind of what I can eat in a family meal and then have leftovers for a day or two. All right, these are seasoned and are ready to go in. I just need to get the oil ready. The oil is at 250. I'm going to turn up the burner a little bit to get it hotter, but I have to be careful not to exceed the temperature. When you put these cold fish in there too, their temp's going to go, it's going to really go down. So let me move a few things around here. So any other tips and tricks? I start here in Texas, southern Texas. I start fishing for white bass in February, but I think traditionally it's more of a kind of an Easter type time frame, and it varies year to year, kind of on the weather. I have fished as late as April. White bass is just something I like to do. A lot of people like to fish for crappie. They are tremendously good. I generally get them as bycatch. And I like fishing it on light tackle. There's some guys who'll want to do like braid. I do light mono. The more artistic amongst us like to fly fish for them. But I'm just more of a practical guy, I guess, and I want to catch fish. And a lot of times they're deep in some of these holes. And it's a good exercise. I mean, I go and paddle back in miles into these creeks, public access from some of our major bodies of water, of lakes. As long as you're in that water, you're not touching the ground, you can actually, in most states, that waterway, if it's navigable, is considered public, even if it goes into private ground. But refer to your own regulations. All right, we've got progress. We've hit 275. What we're going to do is I'm going to just start layering in fish. I have a pretty big pan, so I'm put quite a few. Not very scientific. I'll probably look, and I know when to take the fish out kind of by sound. They kind of, the sizzling kind of subsides a little bit. And I'll probably check them. I've got a probe here, and I'll do a meat check, just make sure they're probably over 160, because there are a few parasites in these fish, just to make sure they're all thoroughly done. I'm trying to think of anything else to kind of tell you on the fishing. I think another nice thing about white bass fishing, it doesn't have to be at the crack of dawn. I'm fishing at a creek, so if it's a windy day, it doesn't really matter because you're in the creeks. The only thing that really screws it up is if it's flooding. But other than that, a great pastime, something that I've kind of worked into my, if I'll call it my outdoorsman calendar of activities that I do, kind of with the kickoff of application season for Western hunting is my spring white bass run. And then shortly, pretty quick, I'll start our fishing saltwater, and it's turkey season, and then we're off to the races for fishing season proper on saltwater. Would like to do a bear hunt in the spring sometime, but just haven't got the time to do that yet. But I've got friends that have done it, like Judson and James, that you heard on one of my panel discussion. I need to pick their brain. All right, we're at 300 degrees. Technically at 325 we could probably start. So some other things that I've got here is you need to have a plate with some paper towels over the top of it to soak up the grease when you take the fish off. Tongs, because you're not reaching into that oil. And I've got, this is actually a candy thermometer sitting on the side of the pan to give me a reading as to the temperature. You really need to have that to kind of control. One, when you throw the fish in, you're going to lose temp, and you want to be able to regulate it to get back up. Two, you want to make sure that you don't get too hot, because if you burn the oil, your fish are going to taste burnt, and then nobody's happy. So I think, it's just that simple. It does make a mess. I make a mess. I'm a little messy because of the oil getting out and about and around. And then I get lots of fish fry, cornmeal everywhere. Saw a guy yesterday, and I just don't understand this. Paddled by him in my silent kayak, He's sitting there in a big boat with a live scope. He's got like three things. He's got a fish finder that's looking at the bottom. He's got a live scope looking into this bush that's underneath him. He's got a cane, some sort of a synthetic looking cane pole that he's jigging in front of the fish that he can see through the live scope, and he's blasting hard rock music. I don't go to the woods to hear my music or other people's music. It makes me shake my head. But there are people out there that I suppose if that makes them happy. But if I were going to do it, I would use earbuds. I also don't understand. That's reverberating into the water, and I got to believe the fish hear it, and it makes them tense up or leave, right? All right, we are at 350. This is exciting. So I'm going to start putting in my fish. Now, like I said, do not overcrowd. It's a bit of an art as to where to put them, how to put them. Just be careful about this oil. I'm over an open flame, so you don't want it to I may have overfilled my pan. You don't want it to catch fire. And so, I don't know if it's required, but I do flip over my fish when I'm cooking it. You'd think because you're kind of deep frying them because they're completely submerged, but I think that the bottom side is hotter. All right, I'm going to stop there. All right, my temperature dropped to 325, but that's fine. I'm probably, let's see here. I was gonna do a stopwatch on my phone, and my phone is what I'm filming this with, so I can't use that. That's pretty funny. So I'm gonna use my watch here, take the note of the time, and I'll probably let this go. I don't know. We're gonna try like 3 minutes or so. The sound of fried fish and the smell brings back so many memories to me. This is something I think about with my dad when we were camping, with my grandfather. He loves catfish. So does my dad. My dad really loves catfish as well. When I was a boy, we used to set bank poles in the spring. If you're not familiar with that, take like a springy sapling that you've cut, or it could be a limb off of a tree. It needs to be springy. And you put, I would say, some really heavy cord twine on the end of it, a length, I don't know, probably 6 foot long. You put a weight on it, and then a pretty big hook. I don't know what size that would be, like a number 2. I'm not really good on bait hooks anymore. We would shove that pole into the bank in a creek, and we would go in seine crawdads, mud bugs, right? And those crawdads, you'd hook them to the tail and suspend them in the water. And especially if the creek was running after a rain, let it run overnight, and you check your poles maybe once at night and definitely in the morning, and you'd show up and you'd have a catfish generally on that pole. And that pole was springy enough when he grabbed it, it would hook him and hang on to him. And you couldn't leave that fish unattended too long, because the turtles would figure out that fish can't go anywhere, and they'll eat him alive, and you'll have nothing left but a head. And that's a sad day. But, flatheads, channel cats, mainly we would get channel cats. Blue cats. So I'm flipping my fish. And like I said, I'm just kind of doing it by feel and look. Because your oil is, 350 degrees. These pieces are pretty small, so they're going to cook fairly quickly. I want to get an internal temperature that's north of like 160 or so. And then I've got this, got a plate with paper towels over. It's going to soak up the grease. Plus I'll put some on top so that I don't lose all my heat out of my fish. And I don't have it here with me, but I also like to put a little salt over the fish. If you got family members that are like, oh my God, don't salt that. Salt it when they're not looking, and they're going to be like, that fish is awesome. So I like to make sure that everything I cook is thoroughly cooked. But, like I've said in previous podcasts, if you overcook wild game, and fish is a little hard to overdo, but if you overcook wild game, you're going to ruin it, and it's not going to be good to eat. So the best investment of any of your devices that you cook with, I think a meat thermometer. It gives me so much confidence to know that something is done, something's safe. And especially if you're cooking something like a bear or a pig, I can't imagine trying to do that without. All right, so I've gotten all of those out, and I'm putting the next batch in. I probably cut my pieces a little too small, but it'll make it cook that much faster. I like to eat my fish a variety of different ways, but I do like to put a little hot sauce. Ooh, I was going to get some Louisiana hot sauce tonight and completely forgot. But I do have some Tabasco. So that'll do in a pinch. My grandfather always said that you should also have some bread when you're eating fish, in his words, to soak up the grease in your gut, which is probably wise. So I did buy some Hawaiian rolls. I would love to tell you that I made homemade, from scratch rolls, but I would be lying to you because it's Monday night and I work for a living, and that just ain't happening. Did have one piece that looked like it kind of folded over on itself. You don't want that because you want to make sure that everything lays flat. It will fold a little bit, the edges, the thinner edges. So anything else on white bass fishing, get a stringer. And I like to bring on my kayak, I bring an ice chest, one for drinks, but two, when I get done kayaking all the way up some creek and I'm like, I've got enough fish, it's time to go home, I throw my fish into the ice in the kayak, in the cooler. That way I don't have to drag them in the on the kayak or carry them back. But I really can't say enough about, springtime freshwater fishing. Other fish that you can catch that are a hell of a lot of fun, perch, panfish. I've seen Jesse Griffith cook them whole, small ones. Those, are about this time of year spawning and later in the spring as well. So, my wife would tell me that, fried fish aren't healthy. And I would tell her all things in moderation. Because, life ain't living if you're not having fried fish every once in a while, I think. So I'm going to try a little bit here. You can see this tail section that I cut a little bit, good and crispy. Ooh, that's hot. Fried fish. Man, I agree. You shouldn't be eating this every day, but you need to have it every once in a while. And it's kind of like pizza. Even when it's cold, I'll have a snack on it probably tonight. I'll eat some for lunch tomorrow. It's just a really good thing. So, bon appetit to you. There's just something, too, about catching your own fish, cleaning it, and cooking it. You really just can't beat it. So I hesitated to do a podcast on frying fish because it is pretty simple and straightforward. But here's my thought process. I don't know what you don't know. And I don't know what you've never tried. So I'm going to hope that there are some people out there that are like, yeah, I thought about frying fish, but wasn't really sure how to go about it. I'm telling you, because you might have thought, you got to have egg wash and you got to have all these other ingredients. Dude, I'm doing a box fish fry that all you do is do cold, wet fillets, pat them dry, put them in the seasoning, and then release them into the grease. As they say, catch and release into grease, 350 degrees, and cook until they're done. The when they're done does take a bit of discernment, but you'll figure it out, you know. And most of us who want to cook fish have eaten fish, and we know what good fish tastes like. I do think it's important. You do need to salt them a little bit, unless you've already put some salt in the breading. Personally, if I put salt in the breading, it gets lost in the wash. All right, I'm going to pull out my second bunch here. It's really important that you have the paper towels. You might be like, really? Why does it matter? You need the grease or oil to drain, and it needs some place to go. And if you don't have paper towels, it's going to pool in the bottom, and whatever fish you have at the bottom of the pile are going to be soggy. And ain't nobody likes soggy fish. And if you got somebody that's health conscious, tell them it's tempura. That's some sort of fancy Japanese fried fish, which actually is like lightly breaded. And you could do all kinds of things. I just like to eat fried fish. You could take them and put them in like a fish taco. You might want to, the pieces to be even smaller. What I would do is probably take these size pieces and then break them up and serve them in fish taco. All right, we're right at 350 right now. So what else could I tell you? I'm going to try different varieties. There's all different kinds of seasoning. You can do your own recipe. Kent Rollins has a really good catfish breading that I do often. You don't have to do it on catfish. I use the Louisiana fry. There's a good Tony Chachere's fry. You can just do cornmeal. I would recommend you putting salt and pepper in it. But there's a wide variety. I'm using canola oil. You can use vegetable oil. I don't think there's really a wrong one. You just want to use something with a high smoke point, because we're at that 350 range. I think these smoke points on these is a little north of 400. So if you get something low, then it burns. Smoke point means is when it burns. Turn these. These are. If only I'd done the other one like that, man, we would be done. Do a comparison of these fish that are at the perfect temperature, and my other fish might be a little soggy, unfortunately. And I'd like to tell you there's an exact time of how long they were in there. They're just like, it's about that long. So, man, fishing, I highly recommend it. It's a good way, now, with an eye towards conservation. I'm fishing for white bass, and they are a prolific fish. They spawn heavily, and their populations are generally very large, and that's why you can take 25 fish. Contrast that with speckled trout on the coast who have suffered some really tough freezes on the Texas coast, and we're changing the limits. I think it's going to be 3 fish in a smaller slot. We need to have an eye towards what that population can bear and how much surplus there is. And you got to ask yourself, why are you going fishing? And often, most of the fishing has nothing to do with eating fish. It's going out and having a really good time. I like to keep some fish to eat, but I do not feel compelled to hit a limit, because, hitting a limit doesn't mean you're a badass. It means you had a good day. So even on redfish, where you can take a limit of 3, I may catch 5 or 6 fish and release all but 1 or 2, because my wife and I can eat generally 1 fish, and I'll keep another one for the next time I want to eat some fish. But we've all got to keep an eye towards, what those come behind us. We want to make sure there's a good resource for them. And we don't want to be featured one of those black and white photos like of olden days of these guys that were killing 100 ducks and got 100 fish. We got to leave this better than we found it. And I would encourage you, as you're doing this and you're utilizing your wild game, think about how much do you really need? Because between taking a deer, maybe an elk, getting a turkey, getting fish, it's a lot to keep up with in the way of cooking and just kind of living a normal life. So just my word of conservation is, let's only keep what we really need, and let's have an eye towards trying to give back a little bit too. So I hope you all are members of some conservation organization, and that you're donating your time and your treasure to it. All right, I'm going to check. And I guarantee nobody checks stuff like I check. I declare this done. Bada boom, bada bing. We have fried fish. So, may your lines be tight. May your fish all be within the slot or over the limit of the size. And if you decide to cook some fish, frying is not the only way, and I will demonstrate some of the other ways you can do it. I've got an awesome, I would call it, from Oklahoma, we call it court bouillon, but if you're from Louisiana or French, you'd be like coubillon. Is an awesome way to cook fish, so I'll probably do that in a future episode. Also have this awesome fish Veracruz in this like kind of a red sauce. It's a Spanish dish. So fried fish is not the only way. Of course, there's always grilling redfish on the half shell, very done, blackened redfish. There's lots of other recipes, so I've got to go fishing, go catch some more fish. So I'm going to turn off the cameras and go eat dinner. And I want to just ask you, please, if you would, give me a 5-star rating on my podcast. Leave a comment and tell me what you think. Leave a comment on my YouTube or holler at me on Instagram. So on Instagram, I'm the Wild Vittles Podcast. On YouTube, I'm the Wild Vittles Podcast. And anywhere podcasts are found, this is Wild Vittles Podcast. So to you all, good night and good luck. Thank you.